What's going on, YouTube? How y'all doing? Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into the next chapter in this tale of Fratricide and Amoni story from the Exploring series. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to the Red Tape playlist, which will have this video in it, and to the Exploring series channel. So please do me a favor, and if you enjoy this video as we go through it, be sure to give it a like, and be sure to go over to the Exploring series channel and check out all the stuff. If you haven't subscribed to him already, if you enjoy his content, please do hit that sub button. Check out any kind of sponsors, any kind of Patreon he's got over there if you would like to take your sport to that extra level. He makes a lot of wonderful content for the SCP universe as well as others, so he definitely deserves the love. So please do me a favor, go over there and show him some support. Yeah, the last episode of Dragon Ball Z, where we left off, was kind of really like a more foreshadowing and kind of episode of kind of like conspiracies and intrigue, kind of a building episode, setting things up for what is to come. We learned that the young prince is upset with his older brother because the woman that he loves is basically to take whenever he wants to, but he's essentially not even gonna marry her and make her his empress. He's essentially just going to add her to his harem of concubines, which obviously is a great insult to the younger prince, who loves this woman and would give anything to marry her, but because of his status and her status, they can't. And I guess it's also just tradition that, the general, the female general who has the wings is, I guess, set to be betrothed to whoever the emperor is supposed to be, right? I think that's what they said, that's basically kind of the tradition that's happening here. They hinted that the young prince is a kind of a genius inventor of sorts, I guess. And so I've predicted that I believe he's going to create the technology that allows him to store his father's consciousness, and then will put it in his brother, right? They'd mentioned that that technology kind of does exist, but it hasn't necessarily been perfected, and he's wanting to try to create it in a way so that all the citizens could have that, and their consciousnesses could be preserved and passed on, etc., etc. And then, of course, I can't remember her name, begins with a B, I think, Belrath, or I don't know. I'm very bad with names, as you've all, I'm sure, come to realize. But on her side of things, I think his name is Haram, her like second in command, or another general under the older prince. They've kind of been talking and kind of conspiring that this prince needs to be removed, and so they've kind of have this plot to use this poison to off him, but neither of them can do it because obviously from events that have happened before, which I won't necessarily get into in this recap, they would be suspected if the prince were to die suddenly, kind of a situation. Yeah, something along those Baelith or Byleth, something along those lines. So their idea is they want the younger prince they want to include him. She's the love of his life. They basically want to kind of use him and blackmail him and talk him into doing it. So I think what will end up happening is eventually they will have that conversation. The young prince will say, well, I have this technology idea, let me convert it to where the emperor's consciousness will take over his body, so he will effectively have been killed but not been killed, and we can all get the ruler that we know, and then you and I can fly off into the sunset. And right now, the Emperor is basically, doing his best 40k impression. He's essentially a corpse on the Golden Throne. Yeah, and basically the queen, empress, whatever you want to call her, is kind of running things at the moment. So basically what's going to happen is the older prince, who has been squandering his troops trying to win a quick victory, is going to come home victorious with glory, going to take the throne, take the younger prince's love as his own. And there's been a vision that they've had that, he's going to lead Amon Ram to the ruin and city in flames and yada yada, apocalypse, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, that's basically the story so far. So looking forward to jumping in and seeing where this next part goes. So yeah, if you want to join us when I do these reactions live as I am right now with my YouTube members, glad to have you guys come in, hang out, join our discussions that we have before, during, and after the videos. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as the link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So if you would like to take your support to the next level, take a look at that stuff and see if I have any interest for you. And if you enjoyed this video as we go through it, do consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow, and it lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see some more. So after all that, with that long intro and recap, let's jump into tonight's episode of Dragon Ball Z with the start of part 2 of Fratricide and Amon Ram story. As soon as my monitor will turn on and work, there it is. Let's go.
Fratricide, an Amoni Ram story, part 2.
Part 2.
In the first part of this story, we were introduced to Biliath, a general for the Mechanite Empire who served Kabar, prince and heir to the Fulad throne. Meanwhile, Biliath was in love with Kabar's brother, Ansul, a forbidden romance that would surely get them both tortured and executed as traitors if they were ever discovered. Kabar was directing a siege against a fortified Deva city, but was proved.
Yeah. When they said the name, I was like, Billie Eilish. Yeah, that's the way to remember. Her name's Billie Eilish. Great.
Proving to be immensely barbaric and callous in his leadership, with unrest growing among the soldiers and his generals. One of the generals, Haram, believed that the only real solution was to have Kabar killed. But to do so, he needs to have the cooperation of Biliath, and more importantly, Kabar's own brother. With that, let's pick up where we left off. Chapter 3. Ansul was walking through the markets that morning, another attempt to escape the confines of the apartment, to try and jolt some new inspiration into him with the memory recording machine. He passed by a group of street children, noticing them staring with quiet reverence at his augmentations. They were young, too young to have any augmentations themselves. But even if they did, he was fairly sure they would have still stared. His prosthetics were striking even from a distance. He stopped.
That's actually kind of an interesting little tidbit there, right? Like, there is a certain age with which is too young for them to get their cybernetic prosthetics, implants, whatever. That's interesting. I would think that you would want to put them in at a younger age just so the body is able to grow and adapt with them. You know what I'm saying? But I guess maybe the technology would stunt certain, growths or cause other kind of complications that could, cause complications in the body as you grow. And maybe that is just the situation, right? As the body's still growing, the prosthetics aren't necessarily able to grow with the body, would have to be constantly replaced. But that being said, right, they've already explained that there is kind of a biomechanical half, a hybrid tree that's like half Fulad, half organic that has grown, and is like the last tree that's permitted to be left in Amon Ram. So you would think if a tree was able to grow like that, that a human body and prosthetics would be able to grow together too. But who knows?
stopped, kneeling and smiling kindly at them, before introducing himself as Ansul. They exchanged unsure glances, so he told them that it's all right, that they can look. He extended his right arm. One of the children, the youngest,
he extended his right arm and let loose an Iron Man blast and killed them all.
It looked like, ran up to him, all fear gone. His friends followed him. Fingers running across the cool, foulade plating, the intricate engravings and designs etched into the gold metal, images of Bumaro I's hammer raised to the heavens, Hashir bringing power to the great city, his own father raising the academy building. Most augmentations.
That also brings up a point too, right? Like, I wonder, as far as like body art goes, right? Like, if tattoos or anything are a part of the Amoni culture, they haven't really talked about that, but if they would be, right, like, you would assume with the human kind of want for individuality, right, and that kind of expression, that augmentations would also have a certain artistic flair to some of them, probably especially to, a prince or people of wealth, people of nobility, right? They would probably have, augments that might have certain kind of artisanal flaring to them, maybe like pearl lined things or jewel encrusted augments, stuff like that, right? Yeah, maybe to separate castes too, something along those lines. So yeah, that's something else when they're talking about this that would be interesting to know one way or the other.
Were nowhere near this artful, but the royal prostheses were commissioned from the finest craftsmen and artisans of Amoni Ram, and it showed. The children giggled to themselves as they inspected, whispering that they wanted one just like this when they grew older, and Ansul smiled. Then he saw a shadow fall over them and turned. It took every ounce of self-control in his body not to wrap Biliath in a bone-snapping embrace when he laid eyes on her, in public as they were. And then he registered the off-balance nature of her glide, the way she listed to her left before jerking herself back on course and coming to a stumbling landing, his brow furrowed with concern. He asked her if she was all right, and she looked up. He could tell she too was exercising all of her restraint as she sunk into a kneel, favoring her left shoulder. She stated that her wings were damaged, although she managed to field repair them somewhat. Her left wing jerked back and forth awkwardly. Some kind of damage to the actuators, probably. So she'd come back for repairs from the one person who knew them best. He nodded, telling her that he'll have a look in his...
The one person who knew them best? We all know what that means.
His workshop. Biliath lay face down on the rolled-out pad on the floor. Her armor and tunic were stripped away, cast to the corner of the room, and her wings were relaxed and spread, dominating the floor of the apartment. Crouched over her, Ansul...
That does bring up a good question, right? Like, are her wings removable? Like, if they are damaged to a point where they have to be, like, repaired or replaced, can they be taken off and, like, literally replaced, And does that hurt? Does she feel the wings? Are they an extension of her body, or are they just, like, an augmentation tool?
Ansul was inspecting her back, panels spread open. She heard him let out a soft sigh, and he asked what happened to her. She replied that she was scouting in the air when a lucky shot from a Deva beast, a thorn-wrapped stone, struck her in the wing. She managed to pull herself out of the dive, but landed badly. Her wing twitched, reflexively. He noticed it out of the corner of his eye, but said nothing, instead remarking that at least she isn't hurt. She nodded while trying to stay as still as possible. The slightest wrong movement could split a wire or sever an actuator, leaving her worse off than when she'd started. Maintenance and repairs were always an intimate thing, Soldiers would form lifelong bonds with the combat mechanics that set to work repairing their arms, legs, and eyes after injuries. But Billy...
Again, right, like I brought this up before, the idea of like nanotechnology or something along those lines, but I mean, they haven't really brought up anything like that. But you would still think, right, that like, you know, the human body obviously isn't as strong as like steel or whatever, you know, the Sulad alloy would be, but it can at least repair itself to an extent, right? Like if you get your hand cut off, it's not going to grow back and have to be replaced. So you would think with their augmentations, like granted, she's got wings. That's not like a normal part of a human body. You know what I'm saying? Like that's something extra that they've added to give her extra human abilities. But when you're talking about like an arm prosthetic or something like that, like you would think if you're gonna remove an arm and replace it with something, you would want it to be able to like repair itself in certain situations if it got damaged. Now maybe it's a situation where, again, like it can repair itself up to a certain extent, and then once the damage reaches a certain bit, like a normal human, like you get a bone break, you got to get a cast on, something similar like that, where if it gets damaged to a certain point, that yeah, you have to like take it off, replace it, get some extra repairs. But you would think though that a kind of technology like this, and especially with how advanced they are, again, cold fusion, that they would have the ability for these prosthetics to be able to repair themselves much more efficiently. Like you would think it would be much more efficient than having to take it off and get replaced. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's just where my mind goes. Who knows, you know, what they would really be capable of. Yeah, right. I mean, because the Fulad does almost kind of sound like almost like a semi-organic metal or something. It kind of reminds me of like the T-1000 from Terminator 2, right? That kind of idea of like a metal that is strong but can be molded into whatever form they want for whatever use they want, because it literally can be used for anything. It can be used to make automatons, it can be used to make prosthetics. Their entire city's made out of it. The technology is based off it. They have cold fusion generators that are built around the use of Fulad. So I mean, like, it seems like an pretty incredible alloy that has a lot of use, you know?
Liath's augmentations were too rare, too complex for an average Legion mechanic.
Right.
She knew how to repair most of her components herself, but the positioning of her wings demanded another person, so she came to the one person who knew them best. Leaning over her back, Ansul clucked and made small noises as he inspected the damage. He reached a finger in, teasing one wire gently. Biliath whimpered a bit, soft, electric buzzing numbing the muscles of her back, and then it shorted, making her left wing flap wildly and sending a contraption crashing to the floor, where it shattered into a half-dozen pieces. Her face fell, and she reached out, grabbing the chunks. She apologized and began inspecting the pieces, seeing their attachments and screws, seeing how they clicked and fit together, flesh and Fulad fingers scraping the surface and nooks and crannies. Ansul shook his head with a smile, telling her that it wasn't her fault, as it wasn't working very well anyway. She asked what it was, and he replied that it's a smaller version of the memory scribes. If they worked, you'd be able to use them to transcribe memories to the cylinders they could read later. He asks her to take a crack at it later, as she always had a better eye for such things than he did. She responds by asking what he's talking about, as there's so many inventions here, but he counters by remarking on how many of them function, and how many don't. It took him years of study at the academy to get to where he is, and he still struggles. And then there's her. He gently plucked the machine out of her hands. It was in one piece again, clicked and screwed and wired back together in a matter of seconds. Biliath replies that she was just fiddling with it, and Ansul says that he knows, as she has an instinct for technology that can't be taught. She would have made a fine addition.
So she's a Skywalker. She can just, fix anything.
To the Academy.
She uses the Force and just knows.
She says in another life, maybe, with both of them ignoring the fact that Haith had long since barred women from being members of the Academy. Biliath grunted as another shock ran through her muscles, and she asked how bad it was. Ansul sighed, lifting his goggles up, replying that it's not good. The actuators on the left side are all shorted and will need replacing. And of course, the foulard feathers that are dented or crumpled will need to be reforged and hammered out. She then asked how long that will take, as Ansul passed her back her tunic and armor. She slipped into it, as familiar as a second skin. Ansul smiled, stating a few days at least, but that's a few more days spent together, although...
Yeah, right there, right? Like feathers. You would think that with that kind of technology, they'd be able to just like replicate the feathers quickly instead of having to reforge them. It's like in a combat situation, if the feathers are that important, that seems like a pretty obvious weakness, right? Like if her feathers get damaged, she won't be able to fly or at least control her flight and gliding very well, you would think. So like that would kind of make the point of the wings not very efficient if they're easily damaged. That would seem to be more of a weakness because, right, like, let's say she's a few thousand feet up in the air, her feathers get damaged, now she can't control her flight, now she's going to fall to her death. Seems like that would not be a very good situation. You would think that for that kind of technology, that the feathers would be able to be replicated like from her, or the metal would be able to repair itself, at least on that kind of level. Like maybe the actuators, might need to actually be replaced or reworked because that's like a major component, again, like a bone break. So that might be something where that needs some like actual help from, the equivalent of a doctor or a mechanic in their society, but yeah, the fact that they would need to reforge the feathers, I don't know, that just seems like it would be a problem.
Though she didn't return the smile, her eyes lost somewhere else. He asked her what was wrong, and a voice inside her demanded that she tell him, but she instead blinked it away. She smiled back at him and answered nothing. They wasted the rest of the day cavorting around Amoni Ram. Biliath's wings were too damaged for aerial maneuvers and long flights, but they were still intact enough to glide out of the apartment window, even carrying another person's weight. They landed in a quiet alley in the southern quarter and donned rough, unobtrusive cloaks over their clothing. Ansul left his earrings and nose ring in the apartment, and for a day they could walk around Amoni Ram, free of the Imperial Guard, free of prying eyes. They explored the spice market, inspecting the mountains of deep red and lilac spices from the farthest reaches of the Empire, watching the hawkers shovel them into clay pots for the greedy outstretched arms of housewives and traders. Ansul scrounged a few coins from his pocket and paid for a basket of fresh figs and dates and apples. They ate from it until they were both full and their hands were sticky with juice from the figs, and left the rest of it for the street children to devour hungrily. Biliath watched him smile.
That also is something that's interesting, right? You would think in a society like theirs, with their technology and etc., that homelessness would be a thing that they wouldn't like accept, especially with the origin of the Meccan society, with Bamaro being like a humble sheep herder that got raised up to be the emperor, right? You would think that, I don't know, I personally would think that that would mean that they would be a society that would kind of like have a place for everyone, and homelessness really wouldn't be a thing. Because again, the machine side of them and maybe I'm just putting more emphasis into that, right? Maybe they are actually just more human with mechanical augments. But you would think, like, coming from the machine side of things, that it wouldn't be efficient to have like people that are homeless. They don't, people that wouldn't have a place in their society would be an inefficient thing. You would need to find something for them to do to benefit for society. And you would think that they would want to do that, right? So I don't know. It's just interesting to me that it sounds like, and that could also go back towards, I don't know. I was going to say, right, because they'd mentioned that these are young street kids, that are hungry. And they'd said earlier that kids aren't able to get augments, so they don't have that mechanical stuff to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the society would be okay with that. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. Powerful always need homeless poverty in order to keep order, gap going. Yeah, but that's in a normal human society, right? Like, this society is also partly mechanical and, logical. And so you would think that logical, mechanical, efficient side of them would see this as something that is insufficient and would want them to have something to do to benefit their society. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. That's just what my thinking would be.
The children encouragingly. He said to her that this is the greatest.
But I mean, yeah, it could just be, again, as I said in the previous video, right? Like, for all of their advances in technology, they're still human, and the worst parts of humanity still show up in their society.
City of the grandest empire. No child should have to go hungry. His gaze fell on the soldiers patrolling through the market behind the scene.
And I mean, that could also just, I don't know, man. See, like, I'm going back and forth, kind of conflicted with things, right? Like, it could also just be that a situation where, just like any society, right? Like, they can only produce so much food and only feed so many mouths. So then, right, like, there's gonna be, chances where there's certain seasons, certain years where they just aren't able to produce enough crops, not able to produce enough food. Some people are gonna go hungry, things like that. But at the same time, again, right, with their advancements in technology and things like that, you would think that they could create all kinds of crazy hydroponic, grow facilities, and they wouldn't need to rely on just traditional agricultural, farming. Granted, the whole thing with the Davites um has like really made them restrict any kind of plant growth in the city, so they could do that outside of the city and other things. Or again, they could experiment with, hybrid foulade organic plants that could grow crops but be resistant to the Davite influence, something along those lines. That's where I would think their society would go. But again, I'm not the writer of this. This is just where my brain goes and what I would be thinking of. But again, we don't know like their full capabilities and what all their technology is available to them. Their technology, and it's also like their way of thinking, right? Like, their way of thinking might not lead them to want to emphasize or develop technology in those kind of means to create a better agricultural system, so they don't have those issues, right? Like, it could also just be something as simple as that's just, they just don't put that kind of emphasis on that kind of development, on that part of society, because they sound, from what we see of the story, they sound much more militaristic than than the other factions so far. They sound like the most militaristic out of them, and that they use their technology to um, help emphasize their military might, kind of a situation.
They walked under the shadow of the Great Wall of Amoni Ram, an ever-popular spot for young couples. Most much younger than them, but a man and a woman on a romantic walk was hardly a thing of note, and so they walked until the heat became too much and they took a seat against the cool stone of the wall, hands intertwined. They passed through a tea shop, taking sips from small cups with tea so strong it made Biliath gag and Ansul laugh.
Nice.
They drifted to a hashish den, the degenerate establishments which had always existed, but had only now begun to proliferate, returning soldiers looking for something to numb the pain, and the palace looking for new sources of taxation. Smoke-filled rooms with cushions and low tables and the bubbling of pipes, strangers leaning into each other's shoulders. Ansul partook a bit, laughing with the party of strangers he had sat down with, and Biliath over his shoulder keeping an eye on him. And the whole day, whenever Ansul shot a passing glance at his quiet love when she didn't realize he was looking, he saw a darkened shadow hanging across her face. She broke the silence later that evening, when they were both lying in bed together, exhausted, sheets wrapped around their bare legs, panting from the exertion slowly fading to normal breathing. She tells him that she lied to him earlier about how she hurt herself, but he replies simply that he knows, as her wing twitches when she lies. She asks why he didn't say anything, to which he says that he thought she'd tell him when she was ready. He shrugged, and somewhere deep in her chest, encased in foulade, her heart melted. She explains that it wasn't a battle. She was flying back to the siege after visiting him, and then suddenly there was smoke in her nose and in the air, and she couldn't breathe, and she went crashing down to earth, landing hard on her wing and shoulder. He asks if she thought he'd think less of her for an accident, but she says that it wasn't that. She went quiet for a second, before saying that she landed in a mass grave. Hundreds of her men's bodies doused in oils, burning, flesh charring and crisping. Her voice caught at the end, and his stomach turned. He tells her that he's sorry she had to see that, as the Deva are inhuman beasts.
Ain't the Deva, brother.
Biliath sat up next to him, piercing eyes staring at him, as she told him that it wasn't the Deva, it was his brother. His blood ran cold as she continued. He ordered her units into a charge through a flooding river, which was pointless suicide, but he still gave the order. They said they wouldn't go without their commander, without her, so he set the Imperial Guard on them, put them to the sword, made them kneel, and then he gave the decimation order. There was a sinking feeling in his stomach, and he asked what that is. She explained that it's a field punishment for mutinous troops. Every unit selects one man amongst themselves and kills him, slits his throat like a dog. And then he had them stripped of their augmentations and their bodies burned. He wanted them marked as traitors to the Empire, because they wouldn't kill themselves without her to lead them into the fire. Ansul is incredulous, but she cuts him off, telling him that Kabar admitted it to her. He didn't give a damn, it was nothing to him. He ordered the deaths of 200 of her men as easily as Ansul purchased that basket of dates. An exchange, blood for obedience. Ansul was up now, staring at the wall silently. She pressed the opportunity, telling him to sit down and calling him her lord. He replied no, and to not call him that. She reached a hand out, grasping his and pulling him back onto the mattress.
Can you imagine being in this situation, right? Where, like, you're trying to explain to not only the person you love, but the person that is, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, he's a prince, but that's not, what I'm looking for. Someone of royalty, essentially, someone that's in charge of your government or can be in charge of your government. And you're about to have a conversation with him and ask him to join you in a conspiracy to kill his own brother. right? Like, can you imagine what that feeling must be like? Like, Jesus.
She inhaled and then leapt before she lost her nerve, telling him that the discontent among the officers has escalated now. She was approached by some of them, and they know about the two of them. Suddenly, time seemed to slow for Ansul. Everything felt glacial, heavy, like pushing through honey. It took a monumental effort to say the next word. How? She explained that they have spies in the city, and they weren't careful enough. They're threatening.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you're royalty, dude, you gotta know that you have eyes on you no matter where you're at and where you're going, especially in a society like this. So, like, to think you're gonna be able to keep something like that secret, right? Like, yeah, right, exactly. Lord Viserys, yeah. Got his little birds everywhere.
To expose them to the guard, to Kabar, if she doesn't help them. He asks her what they want her to do, to which she says, prepare him to take the throne before Kabar can. He breathed heavily for a few seconds before speaking, telling her to give him their names. He'll have them charged with treason. She inhaled again, refusing, and Ansul tells her that she doesn't have to be afraid of them, as mutiny in the ranks is nothing novel. She, however, replies that she's not afraid of them, and in fact, she agrees with them.
Yeah, here it comes.
Time resumed its normal pace, and Ansul snapped his neck around. She tells him that his brother is a madman, and she's held her tongue for a long time, but this is too far. This is unforgivable.
This is where that memory transfer technology would be handy, right? Because then she could be like, hey, I have the memories of actual events that happened. You can see through my eyes what your brother has done. Take a look for yourself and then judge. That's where that technology would be very handy.
If he's allowed to take the throne when their father passes, the Empire is doomed. Amoni Ram will not survive his rule. She will.
I mean, could you imagine if we had that kind of technology in real life and that stuff would be like admissible in courts of law, right? So then you could actually really find out what people did and if they're lying and not lying, and understand their actions from their perspective and feel their emotions. And you could get a little bit better understanding of if certain things were justified or not, you know? It would change a lot.
Will not survive his rule, and Ansul may not either. Ansul responded, his voice steadily rising, telling her that this is sedition and he won't allow it. He demands that she give him the names of these generals, but she hissed at him, sudden fire in her voice, telling him that he's not in a position to demand anything from her. The two glared at each other across the bed, and
Technically, he kind of is. He is the prince.
She'd never seen him enraged before. He asks what happens then. She protects her co-conspirators while they make plans to kill his brother in the street, but she replies that there doesn't need to be blood. Kabar doesn't have to die, although she thinks to herself that he certainly deserves to. This gives Ansul pause, and he tells her to explain, pinching the bridge of his nose and turning to the wall. She tells him that she doesn't know the full details, but they say that it will not involve death unless Ansul makes it so.
Yeah.
She was glad he was turned away, so he couldn't see her wing twitch. They just want him prepared to assume the Fulad throne on a moment's notice.
Kind of fucked up that she's trying to manipulate him this way too. I don't know, man. This is starting to get a little hairy. Little. See.
Sure, the Empire is never without an emperor. In spite of the situation, he scoffed, saying that it might as well be. She continued, insisting that that was part of the problem. Kabar was somewhat restrained when their father was still around, but with him gone, Kabar has no one left to control him. She wasn't wrong, as he hadn't been like this 10 years ago. He was still hot-headed and aggressive, but that was just how he was. He'd never progressed to anything truly awful. Nothing like this. Ansul counters that he doesn't want the throne. He's not a ruler. He never wanted to be, and never pretended to be. Biliath tells him to look at.
Yeah, but I mean, history has taught us that a lot of times those are the best leaders, right? The ones that actually don't want the power and they don't want the throne end up being the ones that usually deserve it. And the ones that covet it obviously don't.
At her, and reluctantly he dragged his gaze up to meet hers. She asks him if he thinks, in his heart of hearts, that Amoni Ram will survive the reign of terror Kabar will bring. His throat tightened as a flood of memories rushed through his head. Kabar brusquely telling off their mother for her counsel, insisting that he was the Shahal, not her. Kabar shoving one of the visiting Shahs to the ground over a perceived slight to his honor. Kabar at his father's side, overseeing the mass beheadings of the rebels from Ul-Maram. He was silent for a moment. He finally responds, telling her to please leave, causing her heart to sink. She tries to argue, but he repeats it, saying that he needs to think right now. She slipped off the mattress, gathering her things.
That's a tough situation to be in if you're her then, right? Because it's like, is he going to betray me now? Is he going to turn me in? Is he really going to think about things and maybe come around to it? What's going to happen here? Because this is either make or break it for her and her co-conspirators. Either, you know, she's going to get turned in and going to have to drop the names or be tortured to death kind of a situation, and he's going to be complicit in it, you know, her lover, Ansul, or he's going to side with her and, yeah, make him a co-conspirator.
Then she stood, turning to him. She tells him that she will not do anything without him at her side. If he can match her gaze and tell her that he believes the Empire will survive Kabar on the throne, she will put an end to this right now. If they tell the guard and the two of them have to flee this city, she will do it at his side. She is his. She stood, waiting for an answer, until he nodded. He tells her that he is hers, and she has his silence, but he just needs to be alone. Biliath slipped into the garrison, offering a token salute to the surprised night guards manning the gate. They hurriedly let her through, and she passed through the plaza, now bereft of soldiers in formation or drilling. Just a wide-open, empty space. The main garrison building had a few chambers in the rear for generals temporarily without accommodation, which, she supposed, included her tonight. Malene unlocked the door with a heavy brass key, eyes still bleary, and he remarks that they weren't expecting her. She replies that she thought she would have other arrangements tonight, but he just says that it's no trouble, and she should get some rest, as it looks like she could use it. She nodded, thanked him, slipped inside, and locked the door behind her. It was a simple, clean chamber. A soft bed, a desk, a wash basin, and a window looking out over the plaza. Sterile, military, without any character or personality, warmth, or homeliness. She dropped her things in the corner, stripped off her armor, and fell into the bed. The room felt awfully cold. The next evening, Ansul's bed lay empty. The prince strode briskly through the streets, rubbing his golden eyes and tightening his robe. It was the small hours of the night, before the sun had risen, and the only people in the streets were the Nighthawks, drinking their tea and admiring the hashish-fueled illusion of the Prince of Amoni Ram being led through the city by a servant. Larat explained apologetically to the prince that he wouldn't have woken him if he hadn't had to, referring to him as his lord. Ansul didn't even have the brainpower to tell him off for the honorific, and simply groaned in response. His contingent of the Imperial Guard flanked the pair, and their formation moved briskly through the streets in the direction of the palace. Night in Amoni Ram was a beautiful thing. At sunrise, the dying rays would set the towers alight in gold, and that sheen would fade for the next hour as the city drifted into darkness.
Yeah, I bet if like the city is made of that, gold foulade alloy, that during dawn and during dusk, the sun rays reflecting off of that and bouncing around the city would probably be quite the sight.
And then the power conduits would be flipped, and the high posts at each corner would buzz to life, casting a glimmering yellow-white light over the streets. The merchants would activate their own small lights for the customers who came in late. Most people would wander to their homes. Amoni Ram was never truly empty, but in these hours, it was the closest it would ever come to being unoccupied. No massive crowds, just people. Ansul flashed his face to the palace guard, who let his party in. They moved across the courtyard, slipping into the interior maze of the palace. Ansul asked Larat where she is, to which he replied, the throne room. The guard have sealed the room, but a small crowd of courtiers is forming outside. Ansul sighed, stating that they ought to take the servants' corridors. This was a practiced affair for him, and they moved through the tight corridors, ignoring the watchful eyes on them, left and right, until they found themselves at a small side door. Ansul turned to his friend and his guards, telling them to stay here. They nodded, and he slipped inside alone. The throne room of the Grand Palace of Amoni Ram was a staggering sight to an outsider. A vast, wide-open space, high dome overhead, its interior lined with gold and red and blue tilework and mosaics depicting the Empire's rise. 20 men could stand shoulder to shoulder and fit comfortable inside the massive dome. Below, huge fabric veils hung, stretching from one side of the room to the other to offer shade when the roof was open in the winter months. The floor was intricately made with overlapping and interlocking tiles of ceramic and steel in a knotted, infinitely complex pattern, and Ansul's feet clicked across them as he approached the Foulade throne, and his mother lounging in it. He greeted her, and she finally noticed him, eyes glazed over. She slurred the words in her return greeting, and Ansul quietly noted the empty bottle sitting next to the throne. He asked her what she was doing, in as gentle a tone as he could muster, and she giggled, curling up in the embrace of the throne. It didn't dwarf her as much as he expected it to. She replied that she was taking her place, before saying that she never wanted this. She waved a hand vaguely across the throne room, and explained that his father took the throne early, barely a boy, so she was barely a girl. She must have been 15 when they wedded. Ansul frowned, as he didn't know that, and he ran some numbers in his head. She would have been 30 when she had him, and he asks why she waited. She snorted in response and said there was no waiting, not by choice. A pit began to form in Ansul's stomach as she continued. She was a girl, not a woman. She had barely lived. She had no idea who she was. Why would she want to throw away her life to be the caged bird in a faraway palace?
Is she gonna say that Ansul isn't actually the Emperor's son? He's a bastard of someone else? Is that what's gonna happen here?
No, it wasn't fun. Not at first. She wouldn't have it, but his father is his father. Stubborn. She trailed off into silence before speaking again.
She's doing her best,
stating that he wanted her and decided he would have her. Ansul replies that he thought she and him loved each other, but she shrugs, stating that men love the idea of them, of having them. Children don't need to know about the troubles of their parents. Ansul and Kabar didn't need to know about the beatings and the threats. The pit grew larger in his stomach, and he asks about the beatings. She explains that she spent a year in Ulma Ram's dungeons, making her into his perfect wife, with chains and
Jesus.
razors. She raised her left hand, showing her middle finger of Fulad, and she states that not all augmentations show devotion.
It sounds like the Emperor and the oldest Prince Kabar have quite a sadistic and or psychotic side to them. Interesting then that the father, I guess, is a better ruler. I mean, maybe it's just a situation where we haven't really heard any bad things, or that the people around them may have covered up for some of the bad decisions, or maybe who knows? Who knows the circumstances and events? 'Cause right now, we've only really heard that Kabar is just a shitty prince who doesn't really care about anyone else but himself. And this is the first we're starting to hear that the Emperor and him may have similarities. Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Maybe an event happened that changed him. Maybe having Ansul changed him. Who knows?
Ansul begins to stutter about what he thought, but she interrupts him, asking if he thought his father was a good man.
Or maybe this is just her drunk ramblings. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, I don't know. You would think, right, that like, why would someone make up a story like this? You know? I mean, she has, a prosthetic finger, and she's saying that, not all prosthetic implants are due to devotion. Some are necessary because of the things that she went through, right? But yeah, doesn't necessarily sound like this is some kind of front that she's putting on. It sounds more like a situation where the Emperor might finally be dead. She's gotten drunk because that's just how she's emotionally dealing with it. And now she's venting for all the bad things that have happened. And she's no longer like having to put up that front of being the good queen, you know?
She scoffed, wine drunk, and says that the Emperor is his father, and his father before him, taking and taking and taking. They like to possess, like to have. They like their empires vast and women quiet. Haith, Kabar, Ansul. And now she sits here, and he rots.
It is kind of interesting, right? That like it does feel like one of the bad traits for the Meccans, at least the Emperor, right? In the story, it sounds like they are very greedy, right? Like, and to me, it almost seems like they might be the ones who really started. I could see the Meccans being the ones that started the conflict between these factions, right? It feels like they have like an air to them that they're just better than everyone else, and that the world kind of belongs to them, and so they just are entitled to take it by whatever means necessary. And obviously that from what we know of the Davites, at least what the Davites told us, who knows how that story was skewed, um the Davites didn't really necessarily seem to be aggressors in any way. They just seem to want to, I guess, kind of live their lives in their balance with nature, right? We also haven't gotten into anything with the Sarkics on their point of view inside of things in this whole story as well. So who knows about that? But what we do know from them is that they essentially are a rebellion. That they're a faction that came out of Davite society. They rebelled against them. They were slaves that had an uprising and took over their capital city from the Davites. So like, and it's not to say that the Davites obviously aren't innocent to anything they've done, because they definitely we're a society based around enslaving humans and using them as tools. With who knows if it's true or not, the idea that, yeah, you have a shitty life now and a life of servitude, but when you die, you'll become, a Davite. That's what your reward is. You have a shitty life now, you serve us well. When you die, in the afterlife, you become a Davite, and then you can, reincarnate or, you know, join the cycle and make a pact with the human and, do whatever they do. You know what I'm saying? So, but, right, exactly. Right. So, I don't know. I guess what the whole point of me stopping and making this comment is like, yeah, definitely from what she's saying here with them taking and whatnot, like from what we've learned so far in this canon, it does seem like the Meccans are, like I said, I guess just greedy, right? And they have kind of I feel like they have a sense of entitlement that the world belongs to them and they should take it no matter what. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's just this emperor's view, and maybe the Church of Broken God in modern times with uh the new guy running it, who is, I guess, essentially still Romaro of old because he's got his consciousness in him now. Maybe that'll be different. Maybe his influence will tailor them into a new way, you know? I don't know. The other thing that throughout this whole thing that I've wondered, right? Why haven't they just dug up Meccan? You know what I mean? If their god like literally is underneath the city, wouldn't they want to like dig it up? For what I'm just like their god is in, and maybe it could be dead, right? Whatever. But you would still wouldn't you think they'd want to like dig it up to see it, build a temple around it to venerate it, whatever? I don't know. That just seems strange to me that they haven't done something like that. Anyway, let's continue.
In his bed. Ansul asks her, taking and taking and taking. They like to possess, like to have. They like their empires vast and women quiet. Haith, Kabar, Ansul. And now she sits here, and he rots in his bed. Ansul asks her why, and the question seemed to catch her off guard. He asks why stay and rule in his stead. He's feeble, infirm, and utterly dependent on her. She could walk away. She replies that she doesn't stay for him. She stays for the Empire. It needs a leader, even if he lies brain dead while she whispers edicts in his ear. Ansul states,
and that's what I'm saying, right? You would think in this situation, one of the sons would have already taken the throne. If the emperor has gotten to that point and their society demands, like, obviously there needs to be a male emperor running things, then one of the sons would have already taken the throne, right?
That manipulating the emperor is sedition, and she suddenly hissed at him. She is doing what she can to preserve this collapsing house. She controls the nobles. Haram keeps a hold on the legion, and Ansul's presence unifies the people and the clergy. They can only hold the throne and kneel and pray Kabar's son is better than his father. Ansul remarks that he thought she had faith in him, to which she says that she loves him more than Ansul could ever love anyone, but she looks at him and all she can see is their father's eyes, without restraint. She smiles sadly. He will do all his father did and more. He will hurt people because they aren't what he wants them to be, and she still loves him, despite it all. She cannot stop loving him, so she will not be able to stop him. The only thing that she can do is go down to the temple in the night and kneel and quietly.
Sounds like this kid didn't get spanked enough growing up. That's just what I'm saying. It sounds like they didn't discipline him enough growing up. And yeah, or I mean, it could just be just a bad apple, right? It could just be that's just how it is sometimes. You know what I'm saying? But this conversation definitely feels like it's going to lead on Sewell down the path of, okay, well, because right on Sewell up to this point has the idea that his father was a great ruler, a great emperor, that his parents loved each other, and now that whole ideal has been shattered, that his father was actually um very greedy person, just took what he wanted, including his mother, etc. And his brother is a worse version of that. And so this conversation is kind of, I guess, shattering his reality, but at the same time feels like it's going to lead him down to the path of, I need to do better. Amon Ram deserves better. So I'm going to, take up the responsibility kind of situation.
Pray to Mechane that he doesn't come home through no fault of hers. Then she rose unsteadily, shakily descending the steps from the dais until she was inches away from him. The stench of drink was heavy on her breath, and she raised a hand, patting it against his cheek. She tells him that she wants him to marry. She wants him to find a girl and to marry before she's gone. He's good, and he's not like his brother or father yet. She won't let him be. So if he hurts her, she'll kill him. He didn't speak as he guided her to the side entrance to the throne room, and Larat sheepishly turned his face away. Ansul told the guard to escort her to her quarters and seal the doors behind her, letting her sleep it off.
Right.
Also, disperse the crowd outside and tell them...
Well, and I mean, right, like, it's good character writing and development, right? This is one of the things that's very much been missing from a lot of more recent movies and TV shows is, right, like, character development, like, we can actually identify with these characters in these stories and understand them and understand their motivations, right? Even if I don't necessarily want to say it's predictable, because it's not predictable. There's definitely been a lot of twists and turns in certain things, but the overall idea of the story isn't necessarily one that hasn't been done in the past, right? We're just seeing how the author is interpreting it and his vision for this, with the conspiracies and love and the what's it, there's a term for it, right? The kind of like the Romeo and Juliet love story, the forbidden love, I guess, is what I was looking for, between the prince and Beliath. And she's actually supposed to be for the older brother and they have to do the secret and all this kind of stuff. It's been done before, but it's interesting obviously seeing it done in this interpretation, in this setting, in the SCP universe with the Mechans. And it humanizes the Mechans a lot more too, right? Like, for me personally, as I've kind of explained already, my idea of the Mechans is they were much more, I guess a good comparison for them for me would be like Vulcans in Star Trek, right? I would think because of their augmentations in the mechanical side, or even like the Mechanicus, right, in 40K. I would think they would be much more logically driven, much less emotionally driven. Whereas in this story, that is very much not the case at all. They are very much flawed humans, and honestly, not very different than average humans of, I guess, that era and time period. They just happen to have access to advanced technology and alloys and ways of thinking because of what was provided to them by their very real god in the setting. So it's interesting how this story has like really kind of changed my way of thinking and perspective of the Meccans and honestly the Davites too, right? Like I really kind of thought I mean the Davites in this are just completely different in general than what we've gotten in other canons, right? Like in other canons, the Davites are humans. They're just well, they're humanoid anyway, right? Like in this one, they're basically like spiritual entities. They're astral entities that have a pact with humans in order to exist in the physical plane, you know? But in other canons, they are basically humans that just use sacrifices to empower their magic, essentially, right? They use blood magic, soul magic, whatever, and they have an advanced understanding of plants and biomancy through their magic, etc. And so that's how they've made their stuff. But in this, again, they're much more they're astral creatures. They're from basically they're almost alien, really. They're from a different realm that have had to create a pact with humans to exist in our realm. And interestingly enough, like through that pact, they've enslaved humans and used them with, I guess, the idea of when the humans die, they will be reincarnated to Davites. And interestingly enough, too, right? Like, I wonder if that's actually how their species like reproduces. Like, think about that, right? Like, through the Davite story, we never really got any kind of idea of how, like, do they get married? How, what's their familiar structure like? Do they have families? You know, kind of a situation. We never really got any of that, which we do get through here through the Meccans, right? They're basically just like a normal human familiar structure, you know. Um, so is that a situation where like that's how they have to repopulate themselves is by making that pact with other creatures in, you know, the physical realm and through that pact once the creature you know, the human whatever, they live their lives and they die, they become a Davite, you know, their soul gets through whatever process, through some kind of like strange thaumaturgical, alchemical, whatever process, their soul gets reincarnated into a Davite from a human, you know? And that's how their population like reproduces. And they're just a pure kind of like astral, you know, spiritual civilization that exists that way. And they have to have a connection to the physical realm through those connections. You know, I don't know. I feel like that's the case, right? Because again, we never really got into that. So yeah, I don't know. All this is to say that it's just interesting to see how the perspective, how the writing in this has like changed my perspective on the various factions alone. And then to also go back to what we were saying at the beginning, how like it's familiar but also different, you know. It's a story that's been told throughout the years with the forbidden love and kind of a Romeo and Juliet story mixed in with um you know, a conspiratorial story because we have the evil, you know, older brother who is going to take the throne and destroy the civilization, who is not deserving of the throne but is given everything because he is the prince, you know, it's just his birthright. He deserves everything, has been giving everything simply because he is the prince. But then the younger prince, who doesn't want to rule, actually would be the better ruler and has actually worked hard to accomplish things that he's done. He's an educated person, he's an inventor, he's worked at the academy, he's worked really hard, he's actually struggled, whereas the other prince really hasn't had any kind of struggles from what we understand. And that kind of shows in his military tactics, right? His military tactics are just throw people at the enemy and, you know, eventually will win, right? There's no regard for his men, there's no regard for anything, and if you don't do what he says, then he punishes you by making examples of you. They committed the decimation. So yeah, it's interesting seeing this story play out in this SCP universe like this. Right, right, exactly. So, but yeah, but yeah, you know, um, to go back to what you were saying about, it's such a great story filled with nuance and emotions and turmoil. I mean, yeah, it's great writing. It's just what it comes down to is it's really good writing and really good character development. And like I said, it's something that has been very much missing in a lot of recent movies and television shows for whatever reason, whether it's just because they don't have the time, they're just bad writers, whatever the case may be. Who knows? But anyway, this is a very long tangent. Let's get back to the video. I'm gonna rewind this a little bit.
He didn't speak as he guided her to the side entrance to the throne room, and Larat sheepishly turned his face away. Ansul told the guard to escort her to her quarters and seal the doors behind her, letting her sleep it off. Also, disperse the crowd outside and tell them it was Ansul. They bowed, guiding the Empress away, and he and Larat watched them go, stink of alcohol fading with her. Ansul stated lamely that she's not well, to which Larat shrugged and asked who of them is. She's lucky to have him, at any rate, to step up when she can't. He speaks with a born authority. Ansul replies that he doesn't like to, but Larat tells him that those who do rarely should. He asks if he should walk him back to his apartment, but Ansul sighed. He'd barely slept before the guard had woken him, assaulted by fragmented dreams. The night before had been completely sleepless. He was tired enough to collapse right there on the floor. He tells Larat that he doesn't think he'll make it back, and the man nods, stating that he'll have them prepare his old chambers, just for the night. Ansul begins to protest, but Larat cuts him off, telling him that it's either that or in the stables with the horses. Ansul laughs and agrees. Biliath swooped down to a landing on the roof of the tower. The sun was setting in the distance, and Ansul was sitting on the flat roof, eyes closed. He didn't turn as she approached and took a seat next to him, not quite touching. They watched the sun cast the city aflame. She finally commented on the city's beauty, but Ansul replied and says that the first time he saw her, he was 17. His father was in the last stages of his illness, and General Maline wanted him and Kabar acquainted with the military command. He brought them to the garrison, introduced them to the various high generals. Himself, Aram, Uthram, and her. He doesn't think she even noticed him at the time, as he barely spoke.
And I wonder, like, Biliath, is her... I guess not, right? Because if that were the case, she would be the Empress's daughter, right? I don't know. So, like, from what they said before, right, it seems to be tradition that the Emperor takes... I guess takes doesn't necessarily imply that he marries, right? Because obviously that's part of the story here with the older brother not wanting to make Biliath his empress, but would be taking her as one of his concubines in his harem kind of situation. I guess that could be the case with the current emperor, right? I was going to say, it's supposed to be tradition that the emperor takes whatever the female general that gets passed down, I guess, endowed with the wings, that seems to be something that has been passed down through the ages as well. So I was gonna say, like, is that a bloodline thing where, like, her mother was the one, like Biliath's mother was the one before her to have those, and then that's been passed down to her? Or is it something where, like, every generation a new one gets chosen in some manner, shape, or form? Because I was gonna say, if that's the case, then right, if the queen was the one beforehand, then that would mean Bilieth is her daughter, right? And so, unless it's a daughter from another bloodline, then that would be Ansul's sister, and that would be a whole other kind of, you know, thing going on where there's incest going on here now, and Amon Aram, etc. So I wonder how that's what's going on with that, you know, with that situation with these wings being passed down, and it always being a woman, and her kind of being a general in the Mechanite army. I wonder what, there's obviously a story there. I wonder what, if there's going to be more detail into that. You know, is it something that's passed down through blood? Is it just a selection process? How is that selection process done? Is it something where the emperor just chooses them? Or is it something where the previous one chooses them, you know, has an apprentice and teaches them? Eventually, when they either die or get too old and can't fight anymore, they pass the wings down, you know. I don't know. But the thought had just occurred to me, right, that, yeah, like if the current queen were to be Bilieth's mother, then that would make Ansul and her brother and sister, and that would bring a whole nother layer of strange to this. But I don't think that's the case, right? They haven't really explained that there's any kind of connection between the queen and Bilieth, so...
He had no interest in military affairs, and he let Kabar do all of the glad-handing. But from the second he laid eyes on her, he knew that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She responds quietly, telling him that she noticed him and thought the same. He was glad the setting sun hid his blush as he continued. It took him another 5 years to say anything, because he was so terrified of hurting his brother, taking what was his. The guilt of just wanting her ate him up inside, and so he tried not seeing her. He never went to the garrison. He left the palace, and still she infested his thoughts until he couldn't bear it anymore. If he was going to feel guilty, he might as well live deliciously for it. Her hand snaked on top of his, and he didn't pull it away. She tells him that she's glad he did, but he says that he never wanted to hurt Kabar, as he loves him. She asks if he thinks that he'll stay his hand the same if he finds out about them, but Ansul shook his head. He'll have them tortured and executed, because he took what was his. But Ansul doesn't love people because they'll love him back. He just loves them, and it's more than that anyway. The Empire needs a leader. Kabar, for all his talents, can't lead, and Ansul doesn't want to. He laughed, remarking on what a sorry state of affairs it is. Bilieth tells him that he can't run away from what he has to do, and Ansul replies that that's what people keep telling him. He asks how her friends plan to avoid a civil war, as Kabar won't just stand down, and 2 princes claiming the throne is asking for war. She says that she'll ask them when she returns to the siege camp, so he says that they'd best get her wings fixed quickly. She replies that they can afford a few more minutes. He nodded, and she curled into his shoulder as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. Eventually, Ansul states that he'll do it, assume the throne, if he has to. He just doesn't want to hurt Kabar, and that's all he asks. She replies by saying that he won't have to, but her wing twitched, and they both pretended not to notice it.
Yeah, man, like, I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of a like shitty, really underhanded betrayal on her side, because obviously her plan is to poison Kabar and use Ansul to do that. It's for the greater good of their society, but it's still a betrayal, right? She's lying to him straight up that, yeah, we'll do it in a way where he doesn't get hurt. There's not going to be a way to do that. She knows that. And she's using him to accomplish that. Now, technically, as they just said here, you know, Ansul knows she's lying and has acknowledged that with her wing twitch. So he knows that, you know, it's not, the idea that she has is not going to be one that's going to be done peacefully. So again, I feel like this is going to drive him towards, or maybe both of them, right? She might eventually come to him and say, this is what the plan is. And he's going to be like, no, we can't do that. We can't kill my brother. And then she's going to be like, well, how are we going to do that? And he's going to say, well, I have this brain swapping technology thing here. And between the two of them, they'll end up perfecting it, right? Because she's obviously a natural, you know, tinker. She's very much a Skywalker in that way, you know, to give it a Star Wars analogy of just being good with machines and putting things together, which, I mean, makes sense in a society like theirs, you know? So yeah, that's where I feel like the story is going to end up going. And that's how they're going to get rid of the brother again, is still by like taking the memories of the original Bamaro and actually transferring that consciousness into him and creating a ruler that deserves to be on the throne. Ansul doesn't want to be on the throne, but you know, who knows? We'll see how it goes. I do feel like, though, that this is going to end up being more of a tragic tale in the end in some way, where maybe he'll take the throne, but it'll be him whose memories get swapped, right? And he will become the vessel for Bramaro. And so they won't live happily ever after, you know? I don't feel like there's going to be a situation where Ansul and Biliath have their happily ever after. You know, they might accomplish their goal and keep Kabar from taking the throne and ruining their civilization, but I don't see them end up having their happily ever after, you know? Yeah, there's going to be some kind of bittersweet end here. I just can't wait till the ending. It's a bit foggy. I only remember certain happening, so yeah.
There was a wretched air in the camp when she returned. She landed late, near dusk, just as the sun had been swallowed up by the jungle around the city.
200 more of her men have been killed and burned.
The dotted lights of the vast camp cut through the brush, and she quickly made her way over. The soldiers greeted her with stiff salutes and nods. Distantly, the steady boom-boom of the artillery sounded out over the camp. It made for an odd rhythm. Soldiers, so used to the barrage, would naturally pause a moment before, hear the distantly deafening thump, and then resume conversation like nothing had happened. Every so often, a screaming hiss would sound out as the Deva returned fire, and those closest to the city would dive into their trenches and under cover. The rest simply waited for it to pass. Under the cover of one of the artillery barrages, she heard something. A scream, sharp and loud, cutting across the air of the camp.
They've mentioned this before, where she heard this before she went to sleep, and I wonder if this is Kabar torturing people, just like his father, with the description that we got from the Queen. I feel like that's what this is emphasizing.
From the charges, maybe? She froze, waiting to hear another noise, but nothing came, and none of the soldiers seemed to register it. After a few seconds, she carried on. Perhaps her imagination. She found Haram outside the command tent, taking quick sips from a flask. She raised an eyebrow at it as he tucked it back inside his breastplate. He assures her that it's tea, and motioned her inside.
Sure.
She ducked into the
little bit of Irish tea.
Tent, and immediately straightened as she realized they weren't alone. 5 lieutenants, all wearing the colors of Haram's legion, standing around the command tent. She looked at him, and he tells her to speak freely, as they're trustworthy. He commands one to watch the door.
Nope. Nope. If you're throwing me in a conspiracy like this, brother, I am not saying a goddamn thing around other people until I for sure know they're on my side and I can trust them. I will not. I would be like, I don't know, talk about it. I'm leaving. I'm out later. I don't know who these people are. I don't know what you're looking for me to say or explain. I just got back. I can tell you some battle tactics and goings on in Monoram. Other than that, I don't know what we're here for. That would be my story. I would not give any kind of chance to this until I for sure vetted these people and knew they were trustworthy.
Door and the
Not in a conspiracy to that, not in something that is this big of a deal. We're talking about a conspiracy to kill the next emperor and change the course of our civilization.
rest just watched as Biliath approached the map table. She asks if anything happened while she was away, but he says no.
Yeah.
Kabar made a mistake the last time, and he knows it. Their soldiers despise him now, and doing it again would risk open rebellion from his forces. They're loyal to them now, not Kabar. He then asks where they are with Ansul, and she replies that he's open to the idea of assuming the throne, if they can arrange it.
Would never say that openly.
A collective breath was
Would
released
never
from
say
around
that
the room,
openly.
and Haram
Ever.
says that that's very good, but asks if it's that easy. Biliath then
Bro, especially again with the kind of technology that the Meccans have, like, who says they don't have some kind of like CIA, NSA, bug implant listening devices all around their camp that Kabar can like record and hear later, brother? Nope. 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 I would never say anything like this.
explains that she told him that his brother wouldn't be harmed, causing a sharp inhale. Haram tells her that that's not how this plays out, and this plan doesn't work with him still alive. She asks why not.
Exactly.
He explains that Kabar has lost the support of the Legion, of the clergy, and of the people, but he retains key supporters among the governors and nobles. That, crossed with his parentage, is enough to support a legitimate grab for the throne, and he's a petulant, juvenile child. He will never, ever accept being ousted, not like this, not by his younger brother. As long as he draws breath, they'd be tempting civil war. She replies that it took a lot for Ansul to even consider taking the throne, and she got them there. Now they're asking.
I mean, the thing is, right, like, it almost sounds like it would be good to push him to that direction towards a civil war, to almost do it in like a legal open fashion, because it already sounds like literally nobody supports him. Nobody wants him on the throne. He's a shitty human being who has been spoiled, or at least is entitled in thinking that he deserves everything just because he was born the prince. Everyone knows he's going to be a shitty leader. His practice of the decimation and his tactics of just throwing, his soldiers at the enemy with no regard for their lives has ruined any kind of support for him militarily. So, like, no one's going to back him if you actually push that way. So why not almost do that? Right? Like, why not do it in an open manner and say like, hey, yeah, you no longer have the support of the courts back at home. You no longer have the support of the military. You don't have the support of anything. No one's going to back you in if you try to take this into a military form. Maybe you would have a small bit of forces that would be loyal to him. Maybe he could go to some of the other major cities and try to round up support and say, yeah, if you back me, I'll make you whatever in charge of whatever, when I'm victorious, blah, blah, blah. But doesn't sound like that would be the case that would work out for him, right? You know what I mean? So like, it almost sounds like it would be a better option to kind of openly rebel against him and force through a legal manner, essentially, I guess, the Ansul to take the throne. You know, because I mean, I'm sure I don't have any like historical precedences that I know of that I can like point to in real life, but I'm sure there's been instances in real life where um someone who in the succession line was legally supposed to take the throne wasn't deserving of the throne for whatever reason, was a poor leader, military, whatever. So, you know, um the nobles, the courts, whatever the however the monarchy was set up, you know, bypassed the succession and went to someone else in the bloodline, or maybe even ended up having an election, you know, something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure it's happened in our histories, you know, in the world histories past. I just don't have any examples that I know of off the top of my head. So, like, I don't know. Yeah, basically, I gotta slay tyrant's power so it becomes obsolete and incremental future power. Yeah, yeah.
Asking her to push him to murder. Hiram says that he's asking.
I mean, like, the only thing I can even think of, and I don't even think it's this case, right? It's not this kind of situation, but the whole story of Cleopatra and Ptolemy, you know, like, that was a whole war of succession between them, you know, that expanded and got into Roman influence and things like that. It's a different situation from what I understand, but essentially it's also still politically driven, where, you know, you have Cleopatra, who's the older sibling in the succession line, who is experienced and, you know, I guess actually had some diplomatic ties to other nations, who who should have taken the throne, because the younger Ptolemy was still just a child, but the politicians wanted him to be taken on, you know, put there in succession because A, he's a male, but also because then they could control things and kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Curtail him, you know, groom him, I guess. I hate using the word grooming. Like, it has a very bad connotation nowadays with how it's used, but that's basically the idea, to their likings, so that when he is older, he would rule, you know, favorably for them, or they could at least use the throne to have their political gain, you know, etc. But anyway, let's continue with the video.
Asking her to show him what needs to be done. He doesn't need to remind her what happens if she can't. She tells him to just give her time, causing the lieutenants to exchange glances. She asks what's going on, and Hiram tells her that the situation has changed. They've learned that the Deva's defense is on the verge of collapse, although they're not sure how. Kabar's lieutenants seem sure of it, more sure than they've ever been. They know something the rest of them don't. Maybe a weak point, and they're planning a large push in a week or two. A week out from the end of the longest siege in the history of the Legion. The prospect was like a shot in the arm, and Biliath asks why that's a bad thing. He replies that if Kabar takes the city before she can prepare Ansul, then he'll return to Amoni Ram and be coronated. She realizes that
and he will have a legitimate reason of saying, hey, yeah, I'm successful in my campaign. You know, my strategy worked. I defeated the Davites. I took this city, blah, blah, blah. It'll essentially be a reason to give him more support.
He'll never get another opportunity. They need her here when they pierce their defenses, but after that, he thinks that he can get her sent back to Amoni Ram as an advance party. She'll have to ready Ansul then, and there is no other option. She let out a soft hiss of air, and remarks that she's not even sure if she's ready. Haram tells her that she has to be, as does Ansul. This is too tight a window for error. He was hoping that Ansul would be ready now, but that was foolhardy. Biliath replies that he's not like them. He's not a killer. But Haram says that emperors must understand how to take a life. When he is on that throne, then Haram can rest. Until then, keep on as she is. Allow no one to suspect anything is amiss, least of all the dog. He must feel as safe as a lamb until the knife is being dragged across his throat. In Kabar's tent, he states that his pretty little bird returns and says that she took her blessed time in Amoni Ram. Biliath replies that Prince Ansul needed to acquire the parts to repair her wing, and she apologizes. He nods, easing into his seat, and asks how his brother is doing. He loves the boy, and it's best that he stays behind the safety of the city walls. For a moment, she thought she saw something unfamiliar in Kabar's eyes, a sheen of sincere wistfulness, maybe. There was a commotion in the far corner of the tent, and
it wouldn't surprise me if he actually does have, like, genuine care for his brother. Right? That might be, like, the one person that Kabar, growing up, actually had, like, a real connection with.
Biliath turned just in time to see two members of the Imperial Guard leaving, carrying a body between them.
Yeah.
The body of a Deva boy, bleeding from the mouth, skin marred by cuts and bruises and burns, face half transformed between man and beast, rich brown eyes, the same eyes Biliath had seen at the end of a collar being pulled towards this side of the camp so many weeks ago. Even from this distance, with the half-second glance, Biliath could tell the child was dead. Time seemed to slow, and she barely registered Kabar's voice addressing her. Kabar explained that he was a Deva assassin that had snuck into his tent in the dead of night while she was away. He tried to sink a knife into his chest, but his guard managed to capture him. He remarks that her duties falter, and he wonders if she's not better served in a non-combat role with the other women. The boy's body was frail, emaciated. She would have been surprised if he had the strength to draw a blade, much less use it. What didn't surprise her were the jagged wounds, sure to never heal right, the meticulously applied burns, signs of slow, methodical torture.
No.
Kabar continues, stating that it's quite depraved of them to use their children for such things, but he was old enough to hold a blade. He decided that the boy was old enough to be interrogated, and he gave up some useful information before he...
I mean, on the one hand, right, like, he could be potentially telling the truth. Because again, you think about the Davite civilization and their beliefs that he's a slave, you know? He has a life of nothing but servitude, and when he dies, he'll be reincarnated into a full Davite. So, again, it could be a situation where, like, yeah, man, you know, we're sending you out there, kill him, whether you succeed or not, you'll be reincarnated into a Davite, you'll have a better afterlife. So, I could see potentially where, like, yeah, maybe he really was an assassin, and then he failed, and the story is true, and then Kabar just tortured him afterwards for intelligence. However, it could also very well be that he's just making the story up as an excuse to having, you know, as an excuse to tell others for his perverse delight in torturing people. Could be one way or the other.
Wore out. A corpse being dragged from the Shahal's tent. The scream she had heard over and over from the far side of the camp, dismissed as her imagination.
Yep.
She knew how Kabar had his information on the teetering defense now. He simply plucked the only people in the city not zealous enough in their spirit to ignore the agony of their flesh. Children. This was beyond depraved. This was monstrous. Even in wartime, there had to be boundaries, and this was far, far beyond those boundaries. Biliath raised her eyes. Kabar matched her gaze, daring her to say something, relishing the thrill. He was pushing her, she realized, seeing how far his bird's loyalty really went, how much she would tolerate in the name of duty. Her hand closed around the hilt of her sword, and her muscles tightened to make the lunge, one thought running through her head. He dies for this. He dies for this. Then there was a strong hand on her shoulder, pulling her back and weighing her down. Haram's gauntlet, his eyes locked with hers. He said nothing, but the message was clear. Safe as a lamb, until the knife is being dragged across his throat. Every single instinct in her screamed to leap and pierce his chest with her blade, to deliver some meager justice for the corpse being dragged outside the tent. Damn the cost. Damn however much blood needed to be spilled to balance the scales. And then she remembered the 200 bodies burning in that field so many weeks.
I was gonna say, right, like, you gotta think that obviously Kabar is looking at her, wanting to test her loyalty alone just for that, right? Like, she's been away for some time now after he did, performed that decimation on her troops, them failing to follow his orders and essentially, go on a suicide mission. So he, of course, is now going to eye her with a sense of, are you still loyal to me? Are you going to follow me? Or after what happened to your men, are you going to try something? So obviously now he is very much got his eyes on her,
Weeks ago, and the expectant eyes of her.
And I mean, just this alone should be telling her that he's expecting something of her. And this would now be in her best interest to at least feign as much loyalty to him as possible and pretend as best she can that this doesn't bother her and that this kid deserved it,
Men, as she swore on their memories. Never again. Her white knuckle grip on her sword slowly eased, and she felt herself drift away, watching the scene from outside as something else took control, moving her muscles and speaking in her voice. And she stated simply,
I mean, just from what was described here, her positioning of like getting into an attack ready position and a stance to lunge at him, to strike him. Unless Kabar's stupid, he would obviously register that and understand that at this point, she could not be trusted. Like, if I'm Kabar and I see that, at this point, the decision's been made that she can no longer be trusted, and I would relieve her of command and tell her to either go back home or find something else for her to do where I could keep my eyes on her, but not give her a position where she's leading people. Yeah.
Simply that it won't happen again. Kabar tells her to see that it doesn't, and dismisses her. And then she was leaving the tent and walking away, and Haram was walking briskly after her, calling her name, as she ignored him, pushing through the crowd of soldiers, leaving the camp behind as she approached the field of bodies, casting her gaze across them until she found what she knew she'd find. The body of the Deva, twisted and mangled, tossed onto the heap of the thousands already dead. Haram came up next to her.
Seeing that also right there? See, that's also right. Just the level of good writing here too, right? Think about what that statement is. the bodies of her men have no more emotional connection, respect for Kabar than the body of some Davite kid who's nothing. You know what I'm saying? Right? Just that aspect alone, the fact that she found this kid's body just thrown aside in a pile, you know, like it's nothing, alongside the corpses of her men, just shows how much little regard Kabar has for those people. You know, those soldiers are nothing better or worse than the Davites they're fighting against him. You know, so that just goes again to show you the kind of character that Kabar has.
Remarking that,
and then of course, if that's the case, then how does he feel about the rest of the citizens of Amon Ra? Obviously, they're nothing and meaningless to him as well. They're just the means to an end for him to, you know, rule over, and you know they're just there to be his subjects to play with as he sees fit.
he was a child, an innocent, and Biliath didn't lift her gaze. She felt her soul ease back into her body, stomach twisted with bitter rage, and she replies that they always seem to lose the most. Haram tells her that Kabar deserves to face justice for this, so Biliath asks why he stayed her blade. It wasn't a question, not really, as both of them knew the answer, but Haram answered anyways. He tells her that there's no justice to be found here, none they can deliver without getting themselves and 1,000 other men killed in the process. He asks who's going to deliver their justice, but she didn't have an answer. He continued, stating that the Shahal's justice is at the bottom of a cup of tea shared with his brother in Amoni Ram. But Biliath replies that his brother is an innocent as well. Haram states that he knows, and he's been thinking about that while she was gone. He's changed his mind. She doesn't have to convince him if she doesn't want to, as he'll do it himself. He said it so even-handedly that it took a second for it to register. She whipped her neck around and says that Haram said that the Imperial Guard would immediately know that they'd fall upon his army. Thousands would die, and certainly him. Haram agrees that they probably would, and he probably will.
And it would be a sacrifice.
Still, it's a risk he's prepared to take, to stay Kabar from the throne. She asks why he had a sudden change of heart, to which he says that too much innocence has been lost already. They both stared at the Deva boy's mangled body. He won't allow Kabar to compromise his own honor and to force her into an impossible choice. He respects her too much for that, so at least he'll die with his integrity. He spoke of his own death so casually, the tone one might take for a bargain found at the market. That's what this was for him. Cost and benefit. Him and maybe thousands of their men dead, just to kill Kabar. But she had a way to kill him with no other casualties. She told him bluntly that chances are he'll fail, and besides, it's too late. He was right the first time, that she can't protect Ansul forever. Haram pointed out gently that he's the only one in that palace with a clean conscience, and asks if she's sure she'll still love him once she strips that away. Biliath asks herself if she's sure that he'll still love her, and she was still looking into those rich brown eyes, now bereft of any life behind them, as she replies that war makes bastards of us all. Chapter 4.
Alright, we're gonna cut that one off right there. So yeah, that was chapter 3 in part 2 here of Fratricide, an Amon Ra story, here by the Exploring series. Links down below in the description as always to the original video. This is actually to the Red Tape playlist. But yeah, to the Red Tape playlist, which will have the video here without my commentary and reaction, and to the Exploring series channel. So yeah, if you're enjoying this video, please be sure to go over there, give it a like, and check out all the content the Exploring series has on his channel. And be sure to hit that sub button on his channel if you have not already. Makes a lot of wonderful content for the SCP universe and others. He definitely deserves the love and support. I mean, great chapter. Great chapter. Lots of great character development, lots of great writing. The plot definitely thickens in this, and a lot of interesting, yeah, I guess just character development is the best way to say it. You know, you've got the whole situation where you've got the forbidden lovers who are now in conflict with each other because, you know, obviously Biliath has seen Kabar and what he's capable of, and he is not a good human being, has no regard for anyone or anything other than himself. Maybe at the end of the story of that chapter there, you know, maybe there's a small glimmer of him actually having some kind of care for Ansul, which wouldn't surprise me because they, you know, they're brothers, they grew up together. I'm sure he probably actually does have some kind of sincere feelings for his brother, you know, but the forbidden lovers are put into a situation where, you know, Biliath is trying to plead with the younger prince to take the throne. Kabar doesn't deserve it, obviously, and that there is a conspiracy of others that want to see him removed. Ansul, hearing this, obviously loves his brother, doesn't want to see anything happen to him, and takes offense to it, wanting to, you know the names of these people and wanting to turn them in. And then the conflict escalates with her saying that she agrees with him and will not do so. And so we see kind of a back and forth between them. And, you know, it gives you that sense of, is this going to ruin and end their relationship? You know, he states at the end of their conversation that he needs to be alone for a while to think. Is he going to turn her in? Is he not? Etc. And then we have a scene where, you know, he speaks with his mother, the queen, and his kind of view of his family gets shattered, essentially. You know, the queen is in an intoxicated state on the throne, basically explaining that the father that he knows and loves isn't necessarily a great ruler that everyone thinks of and expects, that he is actually a very greedy person, is always just taking what he wants, never really actually loved her. She just played her part. She never really loved him. She loves her children that he, you know, had with her, but he was abusive, tortured her, etc., and has certain prosthetics to, you know, her line basically was that not all of the implants and prosthetics are there because of a show of devotion to Meccan, you know? So, you know, obviously indicating that some of the stuff has been replaced because he went a little too far with the torture. So that kind of shatters his worldview, but then it also kind of brings him to a realization of certain memories and things that he had of his brother being cruel. Cruel to him, cruel to others, etc. And so he kind of ends up coming around and agreeing with Biliath that, okay, yes, he's not the one to rule our country. As long as he isn't hurt, then, you know, I can get on board with this. Biliath then gets returned to the front lines. And the story gets escalated in the sense that they have discovered a weakness. They think they can actually break the siege finally and take the city, and it's going to happen soon, within the next few days to a week at the most, which pushes up their timeline, meaning that they have to act quickly, because if Kabar is successful in taking the siege, he will return glorious and victorious and will basically seal his seat on the throne, and will essentially destroy any kind of means of them being able to de-seat him. And then that leads into a scene where we see her in the tent, and Kabar basically kind of very subtly and psychologically kind of challenges her and tests her loyalty. You know, like, she's been away. He performed the decimation, or ordered the decimation, you know, necessarily perform it, but on her men. She lost 200 of her soldiers needlessly because they didn't want to follow his orders. And then, you know, the child, the Davite child, who was innocent, even though he says he was an assassin, which may be, but the story seems to indicate that he's lying and that he just wanted to use the child for his perverse, torturous pleasures. But maybe he was actually an assassin. Who knows? But regardless, it's a child. It's an innocent who was tortured and killed. And, you know, that obviously set her off. She was ready to strike. Again, as I'd said in the video, I feel like, you know, if I was Kabar and I saw that, that would immediately tell me that she's no longer loyal to me, and would have to have something done about that. So I guess maybe, who knows, in the next chapter, maybe that's something that'll come up. Maybe that'll add some of the conflict, you know? Maybe she will be arrested and not be allowed to partake in the next phase in the siege of the city. And maybe that will force Ansul's hand more. You know, who knows? Maybe that'll be something more for the story. Maybe the story will go that way, maybe not. But regardless, the big takeaway at the end there was the fact that the Davite child's body was essentially just thrown in with the pile of dead soldiers that were her soldiers. Very much showing that Kabar has no regard for his men whatsoever. You know, the Davites, who are one of their mortal enemies, you know, he doesn't care about he doesn't care about his soldiers any more than he cares about them. And so you know, a child that he was willing to torture to death for his own perverse means, he doesn't care about his soldiers any more or less than that. So obviously that kind of seals the deal that he is a terrible human being and they need to do something about it. This chapter definitely had a lot of great character development and a lot of great writing and a lot more insights and pushing towards what the climax of the story is going to be that we're going to see in the next chapter. So I'm eager to see what's going to happen, what more twists and turns are going to be there. Like I said, did Kabar kind of catch on to her posturing and position, and is he going to be smart enough to maybe arrest her and keep her from being able to act against him in some kind of way? And will that then force Ansul's hand more, you know, because that's the love of his life? Or who knows? We'll see. We'll see. I'm eager to see where things are going to go, but definitely another great chapter. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the conclusion on the next one. So yeah, I know this is another long video. This one's almost 2 hours long. The other previous videos were like an hour and a half long each. We still have another like hour or so left in the final chapter. So again, I will release these as individual videos, and then at the very end, when we get through this, I will again put this together into one long video. Have a good night, Howard. Thank you, man. I appreciate you coming in and hanging out, brother. Go get yourself some rest, get some good sleep, and might be on tomorrow to finish this up, or maybe over the weekend, because I want to finish this up and get on to Black Adatum next week and start getting to that. So we'll see. But have a good night, Howard. Appreciate you. Thank you guys for watching. If you're still watching here to the very end, do consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. Thank you guys very much for continuing to watch here to the very end of this video. And if you want to take your support to the next level, there's a join button underneath the video to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So you can take a look at those. Like I said, if you want to take your sport to the next level, that's one way to do it. But thank you guys very much. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll see you on the next one.